Hello everyone, and thank you for joining me tonight. If you enjoy my work, I gently ask you to like the video and subscribe. Your quiet support means the world. I'd also love for you to leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is. It's a small reminder that even in these late hours, none of us are truly alone. Tonight we will step softly into the past, following the daily lives of those who endured one of history's most trying times. Let us begin and allow the stories to unfold gently, like a slow, steady rhythm guiding you through the night. The 14th century was in many ways a world both familiar and distant. Fields stretched across much of Europe, dotted with villages built from timber and stone. The rhythm of daily life was set by the rising and setting of the sun, the cycle of seasons, and the unchanging duties of survival. For the ordinary person, the farmer, the laborer, the craftsman, life rarely reached beyond the boundaries of one's own village. The air carried the scent of damp earth and wood smoke, mingled with the faint sweetness of summer flowers or the sharp tang of autumn leaves, depending on the season. Every day began with the simple, unspoken goal of survival: food to be prepared, animals to tend, homes to maintain, and bodies kept free from illness as best one could manage. Your day begins like any other. The morning light filters through the cracks in your cottage walls, painting patterns on the earthen floor. The fire in the hearth has burned low through the night, leaving faint red embers that glow softly in the dimness. You rise, stretch, and take note of the sounds outside: a dog barking faintly across the village, a rooster crowing somewhere just out of sight, and the rustle of wind through the nearby trees. These sounds are comforting, reminders that life continues. Yet there is also a subtle awareness, unspoken and undefined, that the world beyond the village is changing, that other villages may not be as safe, that the paths that lead out of your home may now carry unseen dangers. Even as life carried its usual rhythms, the wider world moved differently, faster, and often more perilously. Historians note that the 14th century was a time of both opportunity and fragility. Trade routes connected distant lands, bringing wealth, ideas, and goods once unimaginable to ordinary villagers. Yet these same routes also carried unseen dangers. Fleets of ships, laden with grain and cloth, crossed seas teeming with rats and fleas, carriers of diseases no one yet understood. By the year 1347, these invisible forces had begun to touch the edges of European life in ways that would soon ripple through every village, town, and city. For now, though your world is bounded by the roads, the fields, the river that winds gently through the valley, and the small, familiar faces of neighbors and kin, by mid-morning, your daily routines guide your steps. You tend to the small plot of land behind your cottage, checking the soil, pulling weeds, and planting seeds as the season requires. Each motion is familiar and comforting, yet also carries an unspoken awareness of fragility. A neighbor passes with a basket of bread, nodding quietly. Their face is pale, not from illness, but from the labor of early morning chores. You exchange few words, each of you sensing the unspoken truths of labor, survival, and uncertainty. Historians writing centuries later would note that these small interactions formed the social fabric of villages, delicate threads holding communities together even in ordinary times. Water must be fetched from the well, its bucket swinging in your hands as you descend the stone steps. The cool water splashes softly into the wooden bucket, and you carry it back carefully, mindful not to spill. On the way, you notice that a few cottages remain shuttered, doors closed tighter than usual. Smoke rises lazily from some chimneys, while others remain dark, their hearths cold. Even this early in the day, subtle signs hint at the world's growing instability. Historians say that fear and rumor often traveled faster than disease itself, and that the village, even in its apparent calm, was already adapting to invisible threats. You sense this in the way your neighbors move, in the hurried nods of greeting, in the wary glance of the village elder, watching from a doorway. You step outside, feeling the damp grass beneath your feet. The morning air is crisp, carrying the scent of the fields, the livestock, and the river nearby. Chickens wander through the yards of neighboring cottages, clucking and pecking with the usual energy, though occasionally startled by a passing dog or the creak of a door. Children begin to stir, rubbing sleep from their eyes, and their small voices call softly to each other as they emerge from cottages. The village is alive with movement, yet even here there is a subtle difference. Some villagers glance at each other with cautious expressions, even in the absence of visible threat. Historians later suggest that small, almost imperceptible anxieties were already forming, a foreshadowing of the fear that would soon settle over the continent. By noon, the village square becomes a focal point of quiet activity. Stalls with fruits, vegetables, cloth, and simple wares stand mostly attended, though not crowded. Merchants call out to the few passers-by, their voices careful, measured, almost hesitant. You notice that some items are scarce, grain in smaller sacks, fresh bread baked less frequently, herbs traded in smaller bundles. Travelers passing through speak in low tones, their stories carrying hints of distant illness, of houses abandoned, of families retreating into their cottages with fear. Historians later trace these reports along trade routes, noting that early intelligence about the plague's advance often spread via such casual, whispered exchanges. Today, for you, these words are fleeting, yet heavy, weighing on every step as you move through the square. By afternoon, your attention turns back to the home. The garden must be tended, animals fed, and the floor swept. The rhythm of labor is familiar, yet each action now feels more deliberate, as if imbued with the awareness that life is fragile and unpredictable. Children linger nearby, helping with small tasks, but often pausing to watch the adults or to glance at passing travelers. You notice their quiet hesitations, their small gestures of caution, and reflect on how behaviors change subtly in response to unseen threats. Historians suggest that these early adaptations, though minor, were crucial for survival, instinctive human responses to danger, even before it manifested fully in the village. As evening falls, the sun dipping low over the distant hills, the village takes on a muted, reflective calm. Smoke curls gently from chimneys, carrying the scent of cooking fires, but the sounds of the day fade quickly. Children retreat indoors, adults finish their labor quietly, and even the animals settle with a heightened alertness. You prepare a simple meal, noting the quiet absence of familiar chatter, the subtle shift in air and light, the growing stillness that carries more weight than the darkness alone. Historians writing centuries later describe these moments as the prelude to catastrophe, a delicate balance between ordinary life and the invisible forces beginning to encroach upon it. By night, the village is mostly still. The hearth burns low, casting long, gentle shadows across the walls of your cottage. You watch the night sky through the small window, noticing the stars, the faint glow of the moon, and the quiet stretch of fields beyond. Outside, the wind stirs the trees softly, carrying faint scents of earth, smoke, and distant animals. Historians often remark that in these quiet, seemingly ordinary moments, communities unknowingly braced themselves for the upheaval that would come. Each breath, each careful step, each simple act of survival, tending the fire, checking on a child, sweeping the floor, became a ritual of endurance, an unspoken preparation for the trials ahead. And so, in this calm before the shadow, the village sleeps, its people unaware of how quickly their world will change. Dawn arrives with a pale light filtering through clouds that hang low over the village. The air carries the cool scent of dew and damp earth, punctuated faintly by smoke from chimneys. You rise, stretching and stepping quietly over the earthen floor, careful not to wake those still sleeping. Outside, the village seems unchanged at first glance. Cottages stand in their familiar arrangement, chickens wander the yards, and the river glimmers faintly in the distance. Yet there is a subtle shift, almost imperceptible, that you feel pressing against the edges of your awareness. Today, the ordinary motions of life carry a weight, a tension that lingers beneath the familiar rhythm. You begin your chores, stepping carefully among the dew-soaked grass, tending to the animals. The hens cluck quietly, pecking at the ground, and a dog stirs lazily in its pen. Every movement feels slightly heavier than usual, not from physical fatigue, but from an unspoken unease. You notice that a few cottages remain shuttered more tightly than normal, and the smoke from chimneys rises in thinner, hesitant plumes. Historians note that such subtle behaviors, closed doors, careful movements, hesitant greetings, were early indicators of communities sensing a threat they could not yet define. Even before disease arrives, humans adjust instinctively, their routines shaped by unseen pressure. By mid-morning, whispers begin to circulate. At the well, a neighbor speaks in a low tone to another, voices barely audible above the faint clatter of buckets. Rumors drift. A traveler fell ill in a nearby village. A house was abandoned in haste. Someone coughed unusually on the main road. Each word carries a weight, spreading faster than sight or sound, yet intangible, almost like a shadow brushing against the edges of perception. You notice the cautious way villagers look at one another, eyes darting briefly before focusing downward, hands brushing against rough-spun cloth, gestures minimized. Historians later remark that these behavioral changes were among the first real signs that fear had begun to infiltrate daily life. Tasks continue, but each action is tinged with caution. Water is fetched from the well with deliberate slowness. Buckets are wiped on cloth before filling, as if the simple act of cleanliness could offer protection. Children wander near the yard, pausing to watch adults carefully, learning through imitation the subtleties of caution. Even the livestock seems to sense the difference. Hens move in tighter groups, dogs sniff the air anxiously, and the oxen in distant fields shift with a soft unease. You sweep the floor, feed the chickens, and tend the small garden, all with movements slightly more measured than before. The ordinary motions of life are maintained, yet every action carries a subtle awareness of change. By noon, the rumors have begun to solidify into concern. A neighbor coughs faintly, drawing a quick glance from passers-by, who continue on with nervous hesitations. Some doors remain closed, while a few open just enough for cautious observation. Traders passing through the village glance quickly around before offering their goods, speaking in quieter tones than usual. You observe this carefully, noting how social interactions have subtly shifted. Historians writing centuries later emphasize that these small, almost invisible changes, cautious greetings, hesitant eye contact, altered routines, were early adaptations to perceived threats, a blend of instinct, observation, and learned caution. The village square is quiet, save for the muted clatter of a cart bringing grain from a distant farm. Its wheels creak against the cobblestones, and the oxen pull with steady patience. Yet even the animals move with subtle alertness. Merchants call out in low tones, offering bread, cheese, and vegetables, but fewer villagers linger. You notice the way people exchange coins with careful hands, avoiding close contact, as if distance itself might offer some measure of safety. Scholars note that these minor adjustments in behavior, while seemingly mundane, reflect the earliest forms of social distancing, long before anyone understood germs or contagion. By mid-afternoon, anxiety begins to seep deeper into ordinary life. Children remain close to their mothers, watching the world with wide, cautious eyes. The elders move slowly through the village, offering nods to neighbors, but speaking little. Even the rhythm of labor shifts subtly. Work is still done, yet with a heightened awareness of what may be outside the familiar walls. You tend the animals, water the garden, and sweep the floors with quiet deliberation, each act shaped by a growing awareness of risk. Historians later describe this period as one in which communities were adapting psychologically, learning to observe, adjust, and anticipate danger in ways that would prove crucial once the disease arrived. By late afternoon, the sun casts long shadows across the village, and a hush settles over the cottages. Smoke curls lazily from chimneys. Though some remain dark, a neighbor whispers to another, about a trader who fell ill on the road, and though the details are unclear, the fear is tangible. You continue your chores, feeding the chickens, cleaning tools, and mending clothing. Every sound, a cough, the creak of a cart, the distant barking of a dog, carries a subtle significance. It is a time of observation, of learning the signs, and of preparing for uncertainty without fully realizing the depth of the threat. As evening arrives, the village grows quieter still. Children retreat to their homes, adults finish tasks with care, and the animals settle with a slight alertness. You prepare a simple meal, the motions familiar, yet performed with greater deliberation. Every interaction is measured, handing over food, exchanging coins, passing along a message. Even in these ordinary acts, the shadow of unease has begun to reshape the rhythms of life. Historians later reflect that this early stage, though calm compared to what would follow, was crucial. Communities were developing resilience, learning to adjust, to observe, to anticipate, and to protect themselves in subtle ways. By nightfall, the village is cloaked in muted darkness. The stars shine through the thinning clouds, and the moon casts a pale light over thatched roofs and empty streets. Inside your home, the hearth burns low, casting long, gentle shadows. You listen to the wind stirring the trees, the distant sound of animals, and the soft echo of doors closing. Even in sleep, the awareness of change lingers. A neighbor who coughed too loudly, a door closed too firmly, a cart passing on the road with unusual haste. Historians note that these moments of tension, subtle and almost imperceptible, were the earliest psychological markers of the looming catastrophe, shaping human behavior long before the first illness struck. Morning breaks with a grey, uncertain light that hangs over the village. The air is cooler than usual, carrying a hint of dampness and the faint smell of earth turned by recent rain. You rise and step carefully across the floor of your cottage, aware of the subtle hush that has settled over the village overnight. Today, the rhythm of life feels slightly altered, as if the world itself holds its breath. Outside, chickens wander more hesitantly, dogs sniff the air and pause, and even the oxen in distant fields move with an unusual wariness. The ordinary motions of life are maintained, yet they are now tinged with a quiet apprehension. By mid-morning, the rumors begin to solidify into concrete worry. At the well, a neighbor whispers that someone from a nearby village has fallen gravely ill. The words are spoken softly, but their impact is immediate. Villagers glance around, exchanging cautious nods and measured words, and even casual greetings feel heavier than before. Historians later observe that this stage marks a pivotal moment. The first inkling of actual disease begins to invade the collective consciousness of the village. Until now, fear was abstract, based on whispers and conjecture. Now it begins to take a tangible form, shaping behaviors and interactions with a subtle but undeniable weight. By noon, a traveler arrives at the village, a man with a pale, wan complexion and slow, deliberate movements. He carries a small satchel and speaks to no one except the village elder, who listens carefully, frowning. You notice the hesitant distance villagers maintain, hands brushing coins quickly before dropping them into merchants' palms, eyes briefly meeting before looking away. The traveler coughs lightly, and a hush passes through those nearby. Historians note that these early encounters often carried more psychological weight than the disease itself, as the visible signs of illness sparked both anxiety and hyper-awareness among villagers. Tasks continue, but each movement is now guided by a heightened awareness of risk. Water is drawn from the well with extra care, the bucket wiped meticulously before filling. Chickens are fed, but you keep them slightly separated, as if distance alone could offer protection. Children watch from the edges of yards, learning quickly the subtle ways adults signal caution, lowered voices, careful steps, quick nods, and deliberate avoidance. Even the air feels heavier, weighted with anticipation and the first touch of fear. Historians later describe these days as the early phase of exposure, a period when communities begin to develop instinctive strategies for self-preservation. By mid-afternoon, the first confirmed case of illness is reported within the village. A neighbor, once active and strong, now lies in bed, fevered and listless, the weight of sickness apparent in every movement. Those nearby tend with quiet diligence, offering water and simple food, yet even as care is provided, there is a pervasive tension. You observe this quietly, noting how routine tasks, cleaning, cooking, fetching water, take on new significance, each action carefully considered for safety as well as necessity. Historians emphasize that the first household cases were transformative. Life became immediately altered, even for those not yet sick, as every choice carried potential consequences. By late afternoon, villagers begin to adjust their routines more deliberately. Work is divided, some tending fields while others remain at home, each aware of the risk of close contact. The village square, once a place of casual exchange, grows quieter. Merchants speak in lower tones and goods are exchanged with minimal touch. Children play in smaller groups, careful to avoid one another, and the elder keeps a watchful eye, offering guidance in hushed words. Even the sounds of the village change, fewer footsteps on cobblestones, fewer voices raised in greeting, a quieter, more measured pace of life. By evening, you observe how fear and care intertwine. Families gather near the hearth, whispering prayers, checking on the sick, preparing food with extra caution. The air carries the scent of wood smoke and the faint tang of herbs, as people attempt to protect themselves through the familiar routines of life. Historians later reflect that these small protective measures, whether ritual or practical, formed the earliest layers of communal defense, instinctive and adaptive, in the face of a threat that could not yet be fully understood. As night falls, the village takes on a muted, watchful calm. Windows are shuttered, doors closed, and the streets are mostly empty. You sit near the hearth, observing shadows dance across walls, listening to the soft murmur of family members speaking in low tones. Outside, the wind stirs the trees, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant animals. Each moment, each careful movement, carries a quiet tension, an awareness that the ordinary life of yesterday has already begun to shift. Historians later note that these early nights, filled with quiet observation and careful routines, were crucial for villagers' adaptation, shaping behaviors that would prove essential in the weeks and months ahead. By midnight, sleep comes fitfully. Even in rest, your thoughts wander. The traveler who coughed in the square, the neighbor who lies fevered in bed, the subtle shifts in village routines. Outside, the stars shine faintly, and the moon casts pale light on thatched roofs and cobblestone paths. The village breathes in silence, aware yet unable to fully grasp the magnitude of what is to come. In this first stage of exposure, every breath, every cautious step, every act of care becomes a small ritual of survival, an instinctive preparation for the trials that will soon envelop the village entirely. The day begins with a grey, muted light spilling over the village, casting long shadows across thatched roofs and cobblestone paths. The air carries the faint scent of damp earth and smoke from early hearth fires. You rise quietly, careful not to disturb those still sleeping, yet aware that your attention will soon turn to the sick in the village. In homes where illness has begun to spread, the rhythm of the day has changed profoundly. The ordinary tasks of survival, fetching water, preparing food, tending animals, now carry a weight that is both physical and emotional. Each step, each gesture, must be considered with care. You begin your chores with a measured pace, feeding the animals and sweeping the floor with deliberate motions. The hens peck quietly in the yard, and a dog stretches and yawns but remains alert to every movement around it. Inside your home, a neighbor's cough drifts faintly through the walls, reminding you of the fragile barrier between health and illness. Historians note that these early household experiences were crucial for shaping the behaviors and coping mechanisms of communities, teaching instinctive caution and the slow, careful rhythm of life in the shadow of disease. By mid-morning, your attention turns to the family of the first sick neighbor. The door is closed but not locked, and you approach quietly, aware of the invisible risk that lingers in the air. Inside, the fevered body lies on a straw mattress, breathing shallow and rapid. A faint sheen of sweat covers the brow, and the skin has taken on an unnatural pallor. Those caring for the sick move with quiet precision, offering water in small sips, wiping damp brows, and arranging pillows for comfort. Every action is deliberate, every touch cautious, every motion measured. This is not only an act of care but a silent negotiation with danger. Children hover at the edges of rooms, learning through observation. Their eyes are wide, absorbing the tension, the careful gestures, the whispered instructions. You note the way they mimic adults' cautious steps, the way their voices lower instinctively, and the way they maintain distance without fully understanding why. Historians later describe these moments as the early education of a community in the subtle arts of survival. Even in the absence of knowledge about disease or contagion, humans adapt quickly, instinctively learning to balance care, proximity, and risk. By noon, the village square has become quieter than usual. Traders and merchants move briskly, exchanging goods with minimal contact. Coins are passed carefully, and small bags are wiped or shaken before being opened. You observe these shifts in behavior with quiet attention, noting how social interactions have been reshaped by the presence of sickness in the village. Even simple gestures, a nod, a bow, a lowered glance, have taken on new meaning. Historians later note that such adaptations, subtle yet consistent, played a crucial role in delaying the spread of disease in early stages, even when the mechanisms of contagion were not understood. By mid-afternoon, caring for the sick becomes a full-time occupation. Water is drawn frequently, linen and straw are replaced, and food is prepared in small, manageable portions. The air inside the cottage is thick with the warmth of bodies, the faint tang of herbs, and the persistent, quiet anxiety of those who watch and tend. Every cough, every sigh, every subtle change in the sick person's breathing carries weight. You notice the way caregivers shift their attention seamlessly between comfort and caution, how hands move deliberately, and how even small routines, wiping sweat, offering bread, adjusting blankets, are now acts of negotiation with mortality. By late afternoon, fatigue sets in. The caregivers move slowly, stretching and rubbing tired muscles, yet their attention never falters. Children are brought food or asked to help in small ways, keeping them occupied while minimizing risk. Outside, the village continues its muted rhythm. Smoke rises from chimneys, the wind stirs the trees, and distant animals shift in quiet vigilance. Even as labor continues, a pervasive tension hangs over every motion, an awareness that the fragile balance between life and sickness can shift at any moment. As evening approaches, the tasks of care become more methodical. The sick are repositioned, water refreshed, and straw replaced. Families gather quietly, whispering prayers, softly singing hymns, or muttering words of comfort. The air is thick with human presence, yet each gesture is measured. You watch as neighbors move with care and caution, noting how instinct, empathy, and fear intertwine. Historians later reflect that these routines, formed in response to immediate danger, became embedded patterns of behavior, shaping both practical care and communal resilience. By nightfall, the village takes on a hushed, reflective calm. Children sleep fitfully, adults remain vigilant, and even the animals seem to sense the heightened stillness. You sit near the hearth, observing the flicker of firelight, listening to the faint sounds of movement, and feeling the weight of uncertainty settle around you. Outside, the wind rustles the trees, and the distant river murmurs gently, a constant reminder of the world beyond the village. Each moment, each gesture of care, each act of observation is a quiet ritual of endurance, a way to navigate the fragile boundary between health and sickness. In the deep of night, sleep comes fitfully. Thoughts of the sick neighbor, the subtle shifts in behavior across the village, and the unseen threat that has begun to infiltrate every home weigh quietly on your mind. Yet even in these hours, life continues in its measured rhythm. the faint crackle of the hearth, the occasional movement of an animal, the distant sound of wind through trees. Historians later observe that this stage, the first weeks of direct exposure, was critical in shaping human behavior, laying the groundwork for both survival and the adaptation of daily routines in the shadow of the plague. By the early hours of the next morning, the village is already stirring again. Those who are healthy move carefully among the sick, performing their tasks with precision and mindfulness. Each gesture, each step, each breath is informed by the growing understanding that life is fragile and that the ordinary routines of yesterday now carry profound significance. In this delicate balance, the village continues its quiet struggle, a testament to resilience, instinct, and the subtle ways humans adapt in the presence of danger that cannot be seen, touched, or fully understood. Morning arrives over the village with a pale, hesitant light, filtering through clouds that promise both rain and sun. The air carries the scent of damp earth, smoke from early hearth fires, and the faint tang of herbs drying in cottages. Outside, you notice subtle changes that have taken root over the past weeks. The streets are quieter, fewer children run freely, and the casual bustle of villagers moving between cottages has diminished. Even the animals move with careful attention, instinctively aware of the stillness that hangs over the village. Life continues, yet every step is weighed with awareness of an invisible, pervasive threat. By mid-morning, you make your way to the village market, the central hub of trade and interaction. The stalls are arranged in familiar patterns, yet the energy has shifted. Merchants call in lower tones, speaking to passing villagers with caution. The goods themselves seem scarce. Sacks of grain are smaller, baskets of vegetables less abundant, and fresh bread is baked less frequently. Travelers passing through, once greeted warmly, are now observed with measured suspicion, their movements noted, their words listened to carefully. Historians later point out that such scarcity, combined with the circulation of rumor, heightened both caution and anxiety, altering social behaviors long before the full force of the plague arrived. You pause at a stall offering bundles of herbs, noting that each exchange is brief and deliberate. Coins are passed swiftly, hands rarely meeting, and parcels are wiped or shaken before being taken inside. Conversation is minimal. The usual chatter of the marketplace has given way to quiet observation. A merchant whispers of a neighboring village abandoned in haste, of travelers too ill to continue their journeys. These reports, though fragmented and often unclear, ripple through the marketplace, shaping perceptions and behaviors. You sense that today, more than ever, information itself carries weight, and even a single word can influence decisions about where to go, whom to see, and how to act. By noon, the strain on resources becomes more apparent. Bread is sold in smaller portions, meat is scarce, and herbs once abundant are now traded in limited bundles. Villagers navigate the stalls carefully, choosing what is necessary and leaving luxuries behind. Children remain close to parents, observing every exchange, learning the subtle rules of caution. Even the river crossing on the edge of the village sees fewer travelers as people avoid contact with strangers, intuitively recognizing the risk they carry. Historians later note that these early adaptations, cautious commerce, avoidance of unnecessary contact, careful selection of goods, reflect the instinctive strategies communities developed to cope with scarcity and threat. By mid-afternoon, the arrival of a small group of travelers draws quiet attention. Their appearance is deliberate but cautious. Cloaks drawn, faces pale and drawn, movements slow and careful. They carry baskets and sacks, and their eyes meet villagers with brief, measured glances. Some are clearly unwell, coughing lightly or shifting with discomfort. You notice how the villagers instinctively step back, offering no extended contact, yet still acknowledging their presence. Even in these brief interactions, the patterns of human adaptation are visible, instinct, observation, and caution intertwined to navigate the invisible danger. The village square hums with a muted rhythm as goods are exchanged, coins are counted quickly, parcels handled briefly, and conversations are concise. You note how behaviors have shifted subtly but significantly. Hands brush less often, nods replace handshakes, and distant observation replaces casual mingling. Children watch carefully, mimicking adult behaviors and learning the new social etiquette that the presence of disease has imposed. Historians later observe that these adjustments, while simple, were crucial in slowing the spread of illness and maintaining community function under increasingly strained conditions. By late afternoon, the scarcity of goods and cautious behaviors begins to shape daily life in tangible ways. People bring their own containers for water or flour, avoiding shared utensils or baskets. Families ration bread and herbs, considering not only current needs but the uncertainty of the coming days. Travelers moving through the village are greeted briefly, but kept at a distance, and any signs of illness, a cough, pallor, or fever, are noted silently, stored in memory, and often acted upon with instinctive caution. These interactions, small and nearly imperceptible at first, form the social framework that guides survival in a village under threat. As evening approaches, the village quiets under a muted, reflective light. Smoke curls gently from chimneys, carrying the scent of cooking fires, while shadows stretch across empty streets. Children return to homes, adults complete chores, and animals settle into pens with a subtle alertness. You pause to observe the patterns that have emerged, the careful handling of goods, the measured interactions between villagers and travelers, the instinctive rituals of caution. Historians note that these routines, though subtle, reflect a remarkable capacity for adaptation, a human response honed in the absence of formal understanding of disease or contagion. By nightfall, the village is cloaked in stillness. Inside your home, you light a small fire, preparing a simple meal and reflecting on the quiet tension that now permeates every corner of life. The streets are largely empty, save for the occasional traveler moving cautiously between cottages. You notice the faint weight of worry in neighbors' movements, the careful placement of goods, and the subtle modifications of ordinary gestures. Even sleep comes with a sense of vigilance. Children may stir, doors creak, and every sound is imbued with significance. Historians later emphasize that this stage, when scarcity and caution intersect, represents a crucial moment of adaptation, shaping both immediate survival and the long-term resilience of communities. As the night deepens, the village rests in a tense quiet. Stars gleam faintly through the clouds, and the moon casts a gentle glow over rooftops and cobblestone streets. The wind stirs the trees, the river murmurs softly, and the faint scent of wood smoke drifts on the air. Even in rest, you remain aware of the sick neighbor, the cautious travelers, the scarcity of goods, and the subtle ways life has adjusted to preserve itself. In this time of uncertainty, every act of care, observation, and adaptation becomes a small yet vital ritual, an instinctive preparation for the growing shadow that has begun to envelop the village entirely. Morning dawns grey and still, the light muted by low-hanging clouds that seem to weigh on the village itself. A faint chill hangs in the air, carrying the scent of damp earth, smoke, and the faint tang of herbs drying in homes. You rise carefully, aware of the subtle shifts that have begun to define everyday life. Streets that once carried casual chatter are quieter now, and villagers move with measured steps. Even the animals seem to sense the change. Chickens remain clustered in corners, dogs pause before approaching, and oxen in distant fields shift with a slow, cautious patience. The routines of survival are no longer simple. Water is drawn deliberately, linen is washed and replaced more frequently, and the preparation of meals takes on a new significance. Every act is performed with a quiet mindfulness, a blend of care and instinctive caution. Villagers avoid unnecessary gatherings, even in the open air, and greetings are minimized to nods or distant gestures. Historians later observe that these behaviors represent an early stage of social isolation, an instinctive adaptation that allowed communities to slow the spread of disease, long before the mechanisms of contagion were understood. By mid-morning, subtle changes in social behavior are evident. Families retreat behind their doors, and neighbors exchange few words in passing. Children remain close to home, observing the adults' cautious movements and absorbing the unspoken rules that now govern interactions. Travelers are greeted briefly, their presence acknowledged only from a safe distance. Every glance, gesture, and step is measured, and even the simple act of passing another person in the street carries significance. Historians note that this period marks the initial formation of social distancing practices born of necessity, fear, and observation rather than knowledge. By noon, the weight of isolation begins to press more tangibly on the village. Those who are healthy continue daily labor, yet their movements are restricted, their interactions limited. The marketplace operates with careful deliberation, goods exchanged quickly and with minimal contact. Conversations are brief and whispered, and the spread of rumor intensifies, carrying both caution and fear. Even in homes, families speak in subdued tones, often avoiding topics that might draw attention to illness. You notice the way people move and speak, the instinctive strategies of avoidance, and the quiet rituals developed to preserve both health and social cohesion. The village square, once lively, now carries a quiet, almost spectral air. Merchants call in hushed tones, travelers move cautiously, and villagers maintain deliberate distance. Coins are handled carefully, parcels are shaken or wiped, and conversations are cautious. Children observe and imitate, learning the new rhythms of life, and even the animals move in careful patterns, avoiding unnecessary encounters. You note the way fear has reshaped ordinary interactions, turning them into deliberate strategies for survival. By mid-afternoon, superstition begins to influence behavior alongside practical caution. Signs, charms, and herbs are employed to protect against the unseen threat. Doors are crossed with talismans. Smoke from aromatic herbs is wafted carefully through rooms, and prayers are offered to saints or spirits. These acts, though symbolic, provide comfort and structure, helping villagers navigate uncertainty and fear. Historians later remark that ritual and superstition often intersected with practical measures, forming a psychological and social scaffold for survival during the early years of the plague. By nightfall, the village is cloaked in quiet reflection. Inside your home, the hearth burns low, casting soft light across walls, floors, and simple furnishings. The stillness is punctuated by the occasional cough from a neighboring home, the faint creak of a door, or the distant sound of animals. Families whisper prayers, recount routines, and quietly adapt to a world that has changed irrevocably. Historians note that this quiet, reflective stage of isolation and fear was essential, allowing communities to process both the physical and psychological demands of living under threat, building resilience alongside caution. As evening approaches, the village becomes increasingly silent. Smoke rises from chimneys, but the streets remain mostly empty. Children are indoors, and adults tend only to essential tasks. You notice the subtle anxiety in movements. A step too close, a cough, a glance held too long, can all carry significance. The weight of fear is not dramatic or explosive, but pervasive, shaping every action, every decision, every interaction. In these moments, the village learns to balance care and caution, developing patterns that will guide survival for weeks and months to come. By late afternoon, the isolation of households becomes more pronounced. Windows are shuttered, doors closed, and even routine chores are performed with heightened awareness. Families divide tasks carefully, minimizing contact between members when possible, and any signs of illness are noted immediately. Even routine conversations are measured, with words chosen cautiously. Historians later emphasize that this stage of heightened awareness and selective interaction was crucial in delaying the spread of disease, creating a framework for communal adaptation under extreme pressure. In the deep hours of night, sleep is both necessary and uneasy. Thoughts linger on neighbors who are ill, travelers who passed through, and the subtle, omnipresent shadow of disease. Outside, the wind stirs the trees, the river murmurs, and the faint glow of the moon illuminates empty streets. Every movement, every gesture, and every breath becomes part of a quiet ritual of survival, a practiced measure of vigilance and care. Historians later observe that these early adaptations, isolation, observation, superstition, and ritual, formed the basis for survival strategies that would continue throughout the years of the plague, shaping human behavior in profound and lasting ways. Morning arrives over the village in a pale, muted light, with low clouds casting long shadows across rooftops and cobblestone paths. The air carries the scent of damp earth and smoke from hearths, mingled faintly with the tang of herbs drying in homes. You rise carefully, aware that the rhythm of life has shifted irrevocably. Streets are quieter, the casual bustle of villagers has diminished, and even the animals move with subtle vigilance, sensing a pervasive change. The familiar routines of daily life continue, but each step, each gesture, carries an undercurrent of caution and awareness of the unseen threat. By mid-morning, news arrives of neighboring villages affected more severely. Travelers once cautiously welcomed, now arrive pale and fatigued, speaking in hushed tones of fever, sudden deaths, and homes abandoned in haste. You listen quietly, noting how villagers react with a blend of fear and careful observation. Each account carries weight, shaping the collective perception of risk. Historians later emphasize that the spread of information, accurate, partial, or exaggerated, played a critical role in shaping behavior, influencing social interactions, trade, and mobility, long before the disease could be physically measured. By noon, the mortality of nearby communities begins to influence daily life more tangibly. Villagers make deliberate choices to avoid contact, adjusting routes, timing errands, and even limiting visits to neighbors. Fields are tended with smaller groups, meals are prepared within the home, and interactions are minimized. Children remain close to parents, observing how adults navigate risk and distance. Even animals reflect the shift. Chickens cluster tightly, dogs move with cautious steps, and oxen pause before crossing familiar paths. Every motion, every glance, every decision is informed by the growing awareness of mortality. By mid-afternoon, you witness the first household deaths within the village. A neighbor once strong is now still attended by family members with heavy hearts and careful hands. The air is thick with quiet grief, the faint scent of herbs, and the smoke from small fires. Caregivers move deliberately, handling the deceased with both respect and instinctive caution. Historians note that early encounters with death within close quarters reinforce social awareness, hygiene practices, and the emotional resilience required to continue functioning in a community under siege. By late afternoon, the village adapts its routines to cope with rising mortality. Trash and waste are removed quickly, houses are cleaned and ventilated, and daily chores are reorganized to minimize exposure. Markets operate with increased caution, goods are exchanged swiftly, coins are handled briefly, and travelers are observed closely before acceptance. Children learn the silent rules of distance and observation, internalizing behaviors that balance care, respect, and survival. Even routine interactions, passing a neighbor, tending animals, sharing food, become part of a careful choreography shaped by fear, empathy, and necessity. As evening approaches, the village grows quieter and more reflective. Smoke curls from chimneys, the faint murmur of conversation echoes softly, and shadows stretch long across streets and rooftops. Families gather near hearths, whispering prayers, preparing simple meals, and tending to both the sick and the newly bereaved. Each act, whether feeding a child, drawing water, or lighting a lamp, carries significance. Historians later highlight that these routines, formed under duress, were essential for both practical survival and the maintenance of emotional resilience, reinforcing the community's structure amid chaos. By nightfall, the weight of mortality and the growing reach of the plague settle heavily over the village. Sleep is fitful, punctuated by the quiet sounds of activity, footsteps in distant streets, the faint murmur of prayers, or the cough of a neighbor. Outside, the moon casts pale light on rooftops and cobblestone paths, illuminating the subtle shifts in posture, movement, and interaction that have become routine. Families and neighbors adapt instinctively, balancing fear, care, and necessity, preparing themselves for the uncertain hours ahead. In the deep hours of night, reflection dominates thought. As you consider the houses affected, the travelers carrying illness, and the subtle transformations in daily life that have become ingrained. The quiet, deliberate adjustments in behavior, limited contact, careful handling of goods, attention to hygiene, and heightened awareness of the sick and dying are both survival strategies and responses to the psychological weight of living in constant proximity to mortality. Historians later point out that these adaptations, while simple in appearance, formed the foundation of human resilience in the face of repeated waves of the plague. By the early hours of the next morning, the village stirs once again under a sky heavy with clouds. Those who remain healthy move with deliberation, attending to essential tasks while avoiding unnecessary exposure. Fields are worked in small groups, homes are cleaned and ventilated, and supplies are carefully rationed. Children observe quietly, learning from adults' cautious gestures and careful speech. Even animals adapt, moving predictably and avoiding unnecessary encounters. Life continues under a delicate balance, guided by instinct, observation, and an acute awareness of mortality that now permeates every action. As the day progresses, the village becomes increasingly connected to the wider landscape of the plague. Travelers moving cautiously between communities bring news, small goods, or information, and each interaction is laden with risk. Villagers weigh every encounter, every coin exchanged, every conversation, guided by both fear and the practical necessity of survival. Historians later note that this period marks the expansion of the epidemic beyond households, creating patterns of adaptation that combine social caution, observation, and instinctive strategies for communal survival. By late afternoon, subtle yet significant changes have taken root in village life. The marketplace is quieter, social gatherings are minimized, and children remain close to home. Even small rituals, prayers, charms, or the careful cleaning of tools and utensils carry amplified importance. Families maintain strict routines, balancing care for the sick, respect for the dead, and the need to continue daily labor. The rhythms of life have shifted, yet they persist, reflecting a delicate equilibrium between fear, empathy, and the necessity of survival. As evening falls, the village settles into a muted, reflective calm. Smoke rises from chimneys, shadows stretch across the streets, and the sounds of the day fade to near silence. Families gather indoors, attending to the remaining chores, whispering prayers, and quietly tending both the sick and the newly bereaved. Even the animals adjust, their movements subdued, reflecting the cautious rhythm that now defines life. Historians later emphasize that this stage, rising mortality, and the spread of disease beyond households, marked a critical point in the development of social and psychological adaptation to prolonged crisis. By nightfall, the village rests uneasily. Stars shine faintly through clouds and the moon casts pale light across rooftops and streets. Every movement, every gesture, every breath is now part of a careful ritual, a practiced negotiation with danger, mortality, and necessity. Villagers have learned to observe, adapt, and maintain routines under the shadow of death, creating strategies for both immediate survival and long-term resilience. Historians note that these behaviors, caution, observation, isolation, and ritualized care, were fundamental in helping communities endure the prolonged presence of the plague. Morning arrives softly, the light filtered through low clouds, lending the village a muted, reflective tone. A faint chill clings to the air, carrying the scent of damp earth and smoke from hearths. You rise, aware that the rhythm of daily life has been irrevocably altered. Streets are quiet, and the casual bustle of villagers has been replaced by careful, measured steps. Animals move cautiously, chickens clustering in corners, dogs pausing before approaching, and oxen shifting slowly across fields. The familiar routines continue, Yet every action now carries a heightened awareness of danger and fragility. By mid-morning, the weight of fatigue is apparent among villagers. Caregivers have been attending the sick for days or weeks, moving slowly, voices subdued, hands performing tasks with quiet deliberation. Meals are prepared with care, water drawn and distributed cautiously, and chores are completed with heightened awareness of risk. Children observe, learning instinctively the balance between necessary activity and careful avoidance. Historians later note that this prolonged period of physical and emotional labor created both resilience and vulnerability, shaping the ways communities coped with the ongoing crisis. By noon, grief has begun to take a visible hold. Families gather quietly around the deceased, performing small rituals of care and remembrance. The faint smell of herbs, the soft flicker of candlelight, and the quiet murmur of prayers fill cottages and streets. You note the careful handling of bodies, the subtle ways villagers honor the dead while maintaining caution, and the emotional restraint that arises from prolonged exposure to loss. Historians emphasize that these rituals were essential not only for social cohesion, but for psychological survival, helping communities navigate repeated encounters with mortality. By mid-afternoon, the strain of constant vigilance becomes evident. Villagers move more slowly, gestures once casual are now deliberate, and voices are quiet. The psychological burden of living in a community under threat manifests in small, everyday behaviors: hesitation before speaking, careful consideration of steps and routes, and subtle avoidance of others. Children, observing and mimicking these behaviors, internalize a new social awareness. Even the animals reflect the tension, moving predictably and cautiously. Historians later observe that these subtle adaptations represent a critical intersection of psychology and survival strategy, where behavior evolves in response to prolonged stress and threat. By late afternoon, coping mechanisms emerge. Families develop routines that balance care for the sick, attention to essential tasks, and quiet moments of reflection. Small rituals, the lighting of a candle, the arrangement of herbs, a whispered prayer, provide structure and comfort. Villagers exchange information cautiously, sharing observations about illness, mortality, and movement in neighboring areas. Even these small acts are imbued with significance, forming the scaffolding of adaptation that allows communities to maintain functionality under prolonged duress. As evening approaches, the village slows further. Smoke curls gently from chimneys and shadows stretch across streets and rooftops. Families gather around hearths, performing quiet tasks, and children observe the subdued rhythm of life. You notice how grief, fear, and fatigue intermingle with practical necessity, creating a delicate balance that guides behavior. Historians later note that this prolonged psychological strain fostered both communal resilience and individual coping strategies, highlighting the human capacity for adaptation under conditions of sustained adversity. By nightfall, the village is enveloped in a quiet, reflective calm. The streets are nearly empty, save for the occasional movement of a caregiver attending to the sick. Inside homes, the smell of cooking fires, the faint tang of herbs, and the soft murmur of voices provide a subtle sense of continuity. Sleep is tentative, punctuated by the faint sounds of grief, movement, or illness. Each action, each gesture, each thought is informed by the ongoing necessity of balancing care, caution, and emotional endurance. In the deep hours of night, reflection becomes a quiet companion. Thoughts linger on neighbors lost, travelers who carried illness, and the subtle shifts in social behavior that have emerged. Even small routines, cleaning utensils, tending animals, or distributing food, are now imbued with meaning, forming a careful choreography of survival. Historians emphasize that the cumulative psychological strain of the plague shaped both immediate behaviors and long-term social structures, embedding caution, ritual, and emotional resilience into the fabric of village life. By the early morning of the next day, the village stirs once more under a sky heavy with clouds. Those who remain healthy perform tasks with careful attention, balancing physical labor, care for the sick, and observation of social boundaries. Children learn through observation, internalizing behaviors that guide interactions and safety. Even the animals move predictably, reflecting the structured rhythm that the village has developed. Historians note that these patterns formed under pressure allowed communities to maintain continuity and cohesion despite the persistent threat of disease and mortality. By late morning, small adaptations have become routine. Villagers ration resources carefully, minimize unnecessary contact, and maintain deliberate patterns of hygiene and observation. Conversations are measured, gestures cautious, and movement restrained. Even leisure activities are subdued, reflecting a community that has adapted psychologically to a world dominated by uncertainty and the shadow of death. These adaptations are subtle but profound, illustrating the human capacity for behavioral evolution in response to prolonged and unpredictable threats. By afternoon, the emotional weight of repeated loss is palpable. Families have learned to grieve quietly, balancing mourning with the need to continue caring for others and maintaining essential routines. Children witness grief, care, and adaptation, forming a nuanced understanding of mortality and communal responsibility. Historians later highlight that these prolonged experiences shaped not only behavior but social cohesion, teaching skills of observation, empathy, and cautious interaction that were essential for survival. As evening falls, the village prepares for another night under the muted glow of hearth fires and the pale light of the moon. Smoke rises from chimneys, animals settle, and families perform tasks with quiet deliberation. Every movement, every gesture, every breath has become part of a carefully calibrated ritual of survival. The accumulation of fatigue, grief, and social adaptation defines life at this stage, shaping both the psychological and practical frameworks that allow the village to endure. By nightfall, the village rests in tentative stillness. Outside, the wind stirs trees, and the river murmurs softly. Families remain vigilant yet calm, performing quiet acts of care and observation. Sleep is fitful, but the patterns of behavior that have developed provide a sense of structure and continuity. Historians later observe that this stage, prolonged psychological strain, grief, and adaptation, was a defining moment in human resilience during the Black Death, illustrating the interplay of fear, care, and instinctive strategies for survival. Morning arrives over the village with a muted grey light, the clouds low and heavy, as if echoing the weight of recent losses. You rise to the subtle sound of birds and the faint murmur of the river, yet the streets are quiet. Villagers move deliberately, steps measured, voices subdued. Animals follow the cautious rhythm, oxen grazing slowly, chickens clustering in corners, dogs watching from doorways. The world feels both familiar and transformed, ordinary routines now interwoven with layers of awareness, care, and quiet vigilance. By mid-morning, the task of burial has become central to village life. Families and neighbors gather in small groups, moving with care to prepare the deceased for interment. The process is deliberate, hands performing each action with respect yet guided by instinctive caution. Herbs are placed near bodies, soft prayers offered, and simple rituals observed to honor the dead while minimizing exposure. Historians later observe that these practices represented one of the earliest forms of organized communal adaptation, combining hygiene, ritual, and social cohesion in the face of repeated mortality. By noon, the mechanics of quarantine are apparent. Households with the sick or recently bereaved are cordoned with simple markers, a piece of cloth hung at the door, or a small stick placed across the entrance. Villagers respect these boundaries, offering food or water at a safe distance, leaving messages of support and maintaining social connection without physical contact. Children watch, learning the delicate balance of caution and care, while adults adjust routines to accommodate these new protocols. Historians note that such grassroots quarantine measures were among the most effective early strategies for slowing the spread of the disease, even without formal understanding of contagion. By mid-afternoon, the village ritualizes its response further. Bells toll softly in the distance to signal funerals, and the movement of the dead to communal graves becomes an orchestrated process. People travel in small groups, carrying bodies with minimal contact, chanting soft prayers, and observing symbolic gestures. The entire community participates indirectly through observation, offering prayers or leaving tokens of remembrance. This rhythm of death, mourning, and ritual imposes a structure on daily life, providing both practical safety and psychological reassurance. By late afternoon, the interweaving of care, ritual, and adaptation becomes clear. Families ration food, coordinate water collection, and maintain hygiene routines with increased diligence. Children, keen observers, internalize these patterns, learning lessons in both caution and communal responsibility. Even the animals reflect the changed environment. Livestock move predictably, dogs follow careful paths, and birds adjust their feeding patterns. Historians later emphasize that the convergence of practical action and ritualized behavior was central to survival, offering both protection and emotional stability in the midst of relentless mortality. As evening approaches, the village streets grow quieter, the air thick with the subtle tension of anticipation and reflection. Smoke curls from chimneys, families gather around hearths, and children huddle near parents. Conversations are hushed, gestures deliberate, and movement is minimized. You notice the ways grief, ritual, and practical care intersect. Herbs are placed near doorways, prayers whispered for those still sick, and meals prepared with thoughtful attention. Historians note that this stage of life, where practical necessity and ritual overlap, reflects a deeply human capacity to create order, meaning, and protection amidst chaos. By nightfall, the village is enveloped in reflective calm. The soft glow of firelight illuminates interiors, casting shadows that flicker against walls. Outside, the streets are nearly empty, save for a small group transporting bodies to communal graves. Families perform essential tasks quietly, and children watch, absorbing the visual and behavioral cues that define survival. Historians later observe that this combination of structured ritual, observation, and adaptation was fundamental in helping communities endure prolonged periods of high mortality, providing a framework for both practical and psychological resilience. In the deep hours of night, you notice the rhythm of village life continuing in subtle ways. The river murmurs, wind stirs the trees, and the faint glow of moonlight traces rooftops and cobblestone paths. Tasks that once seemed ordinary, tending animals, distributing water, preparing meals, now carry profound significance. Even small gestures, like leaving herbs at a doorway or whispering a prayer, reinforce communal cohesion and individual psychological balance. Historians highlight that these small, repeated actions formed the invisible scaffolding of social adaptation, guiding villagers through relentless uncertainty. By the early morning of the next day, villagers rise with cautious diligence, caregivers continue their work, households maintain quarantine boundaries, and children move quietly under watchful eyes. Tasks are completed with measured attention, routines refined to balance necessity and safety. Even as grief lingers, the rhythms of daily life provide structure. Meals are prepared, water is drawn, and the dead are honored with care. Historians note that these adaptations, both practical and ritualistic, illustrate how human communities navigate mortality, uncertainty, and social responsibility simultaneously. By late morning, the village adapts further. Graves are dug efficiently, food and water are delivered carefully, and households continue to maintain boundaries. Children practice observation and subtle assistance, learning the rules of engagement that allow survival without unnecessary exposure. Even interactions with travelers are guided by strict protocols, reflecting the balance of curiosity, caution, and communal care. Historians later emphasize that these practices were the early foundations of public health measures, emerging organically in response to the exigencies of widespread disease. By afternoon, the integration of ritual, quarantine, and daily survival routines reaches a new equilibrium. Families coordinate chores, manage resources, and maintain hygiene while attending to the sick and the bereaved. Community observation ensures that boundaries are respected and that vulnerable households receive support. Children, fully immersed in this social ecosystem, internalize behaviors that will guide them in future crises. Historians point out that these combined strategies of ritual, observation, and practical adaptation were remarkably sophisticated, reflecting both emotional intelligence and social ingenuity. As evening falls, the village prepares for another night under muted light and low clouds. Smoke rises from chimneys, footsteps are quiet, and families huddle indoors, balancing rest, care, and vigilance. Even the animals settle in predictable patterns, moving with caution, mirroring the rhythms of their human companions. Historians later emphasize that the consolidation of these strategies, burial practices, quarantine, ritual, observation, and careful daily routines, allowed communities to navigate not only immediate survival, but also the broader psychological and social consequences of prolonged plague exposure. By nightfall, the village rests with cautious reflection. Stars shine faintly through clouds, and the moon casts silver light over rooftops and cobblestone streets. Every action, every ritual, every observation is part of a delicate choreography that balances fear, care, and practical necessity. Historians highlight that these coordinated behaviors, emerging organically without formal instruction, exemplify the resilience, adaptability, and ingenuity that allowed human communities to endure the Black Death, preserving both life and the social fabric in the face of relentless mortality. Morning arrives over the village in a soft, muted light, the clouds low and thick, as if they carry the weight of months of hardship. You rise to a world that feels familiar yet subtly altered. Streets are quieter than before the plague, but life moves with a tentative rhythm. Animals respond to the changed human behavior. Chickens cluster near homes, dogs follow measured paths, and oxen graze in carefully tended fields. The village itself bears the marks of adaptation, homes cleaned meticulously, windows open to let in fresh air, and herbs hanging in preparation for both daily use and ritual protection. By mid-morning, the routines of daily life have begun to settle into a new pattern. Families wake early, perform chores, and attend to both household and field work with a sense of quiet diligence. Food is prepared carefully, water drawn and stored, and children observe and assist with small, structured tasks. Historians later note that these long-term adaptations formed under the prolonged pressures of disease and mortality became embedded in the social fabric, shaping behavior for generations. By noon, the cumulative lessons of the past months are evident in every aspect of village life. Hygiene practices, previously sporadic, are now routine. Hands and utensils are cleaned meticulously, waste is disposed of thoughtfully, and spaces are ventilated regularly. Households maintain boundaries that balance social connection with precaution. Children internalize these routines, learning the subtleties of caution, observation, and responsibility through daily practice. Even minor behaviors, such as the careful exchange of coins or passing of goods, reflect lessons learned in the shadow of mortality. By mid-afternoon, the village exhibits subtle signs of psychological recovery. While grief and fatigue remain present, they are balanced by resilience and familiarity with new patterns of life. Families engage in small acts of care, tending animals, preparing meals, or sharing stories that reinforce both social cohesion and personal stability. You notice how rituals of remembrance persist alongside practical routines. Herbs continue to be placed near doors, prayers offered quietly, and the deceased honored with ongoing reflection. Historians later emphasize that these practices help stabilize emotional and social structures, supporting communal endurance. By late afternoon, the influence of long-term adaptation becomes particularly evident. Work is performed efficiently, interactions are measured but not fearful, and the village begins to function with a renewed sense of rhythm. Children play in small groups, observing the careful balance of caution and freedom, while adults coordinate tasks across households to maintain essential services and labor. Even the landscape reflects adaptation. Fields are carefully tended, roads maintained, and communal spaces cleared of debris. Historians note that these patterns represent the resilience of communities, demonstrating the capacity to integrate lessons learned under extreme stress into enduring structures of daily life. As evening approaches, the village takes on a quiet, reflective calm. Smoke rises from chimneys, shadows stretch across rooftops, and animals settle into predictable routines. Families gather around hearths, sharing meals, exchanging information, and performing quiet rituals. You notice the subtle ways grief, memory, and adaptation coexist. Herbs placed for protection, prayers whispered for those lost, and stories recounted to preserve knowledge of the past months. Historians later observe that these combined practices, practical, ritual, and reflective, allowed communities to maintain cohesion and continuity even after waves of disease passed. By nightfall, the village is enveloped in a sense of tentative stability. Stars shine faintly through clouds, and the moon casts pale light over rooftops and cobblestone streets. Every action, every gesture, every breath reflects a balance between care, routine, and the knowledge accumulated over months of hardship. Children internalize these behaviors as the foundation for future survival, while adults coordinate tasks with quiet precision. The rhythm of life has shifted, yet it continues with remarkable resilience and order. In the deep hours of night, reflection and memory become central to survival. Families recall those lost, recount the lessons learned, and quietly reinforce patterns of care and observation. Even minor tasks, preparing food, tending animals, maintaining homes, carry significance, embodying the strategies that allowed survival through repeated waves of illness. Historians later emphasize that these acts of continuity, reflection, and ritual were essential for long-term community stability, embedding knowledge and experience into the fabric of everyday life. By the early morning of the following day, the village stirs with careful energy. Households resume routines established during the crisis, moving with quiet precision. Children assist with small tasks, observing the delicate balance of caution, care, and practical necessity. Adults coordinate fieldwork, maintenance, and domestic chores with structured efficiency, aware that the knowledge accumulated over months is vital to the persistence of life and community. Historians later note that the formation of these long-term behavioral patterns represents one of the most significant outcomes of prolonged exposure to crisis, the internalization of survival strategies into daily life. By late morning, the village displays subtle but profound transformations. Paths are cleared, homes maintained meticulously, and communal spaces are organized for both work and reflection. Children observe the balance between freedom and responsibility, learning the rhythms of daily life alongside lessons in care and caution. Social interactions, once governed by immediate fear, now incorporate learned behaviors of observation, hygiene, and measured engagement. Even the simplest gestures, offering a coin, sharing water, or greeting a neighbor, reflect accumulated wisdom and social adaptation. By afternoon, the village demonstrates the integration of practical, social, and psychological adaptation. Work continues efficiently, rituals persist quietly, and social cohesion is reinforced through careful observation and structured activity. Families continue to honor those lost, while ensuring that essential labor, care for animals, and maintenance of homes proceed without disruption. Historians emphasize that this stage of long-term adaptation reflects both resilience and ingenuity, illustrating the human capacity to embed lessons from crisis into sustainable structures of everyday life. As evening falls, the village assumes a quiet, reflective rhythm. Smoke rises gently from chimneys, shadows stretch across streets and rooftops, and families gather to perform essential tasks while engaging in quiet reflection. Children absorb these rhythms, observing both caution and care, while adults coordinate routines with efficiency and awareness. Even the animals settle predictably, mirroring the structured patterns of the humans around them. Historians later highlight that the persistence of routine, ritual, and observation allowed communities to endure and stabilize, even as the memory of mortality remained present. By nightfall, the village rests under a sky heavy with clouds, stars faintly shining, and the moon casting pale light over cobblestone paths. The patterns of life established over months, practical tasks, rituals of remembrance, and structured social behavior have become internalized, providing both stability and resilience. Families sleep with awareness of past hardships, yet confidence in the continuity of their routines. Historians note that these long-term adaptations exemplify the persistence of daily life and the remarkable capacity of human communities to learn, adapt, and endure in the face of prolonged crises. Morning arrives over the village with a pale, soft light and a quiet sense of anticipation. The air carries the scent of damp earth, smoke from chimneys, and freshly turned soil in fields that have been carefully tended despite the months of hardship. You rise to a world that is familiar yet subtly transformed. Streets remain quieter than before, yet a cautious energy pervades daily life. Villagers move deliberately, observing routines refined during the plague, aware of both opportunity and risk in the post-crisis environment. By mid-morning, the effects of population loss become apparent in daily labor. Fewer hands are available to tend fields, care for animals, and perform essential household tasks. Families adapt by sharing responsibilities, children assisting more actively, and neighbors coordinating collective efforts. Fields that once required large groups are now managed with small teams, each step planned to maximize efficiency while minimizing fatigue. Historians later note that this shortage of labor contributed to subtle shifts in power dynamics, wages, and the social role of laborers in rural communities. By noon, the economic landscape begins to adjust. Villagers negotiate higher wages for essential labor, trade goods with greater care, and develop new systems to balance scarcity and need. Craftsmen and artisans, fewer in number, find their skills in higher demand, and households adapt by diversifying tasks or bartering for services that were once routine. Children, observing these negotiations, learn the value of work, adaptability, and social interaction in an economy reshaped by crisis. Historians highlight that these post-plague economic shifts contributed to lasting social and economic transformations across Europe. By mid-afternoon, new opportunities and challenges emerge. Families reorganize labor to optimize both survival and productivity. Tasks are prioritized carefully, fields are tilled, livestock tended, and homes maintained with precision. Community members develop informal networks of mutual assistance, providing help across households to ensure essential work continues. Even minor activities, fetching water, carrying firewood, or delivering food, are guided by a combination of efficiency, caution, and social obligation. Historians later emphasize that these adaptive labor practices illustrate human ingenuity in balancing risk, necessity, and opportunity under extraordinary conditions. By late afternoon, trade and exchange begin to take on heightened significance. Merchants and travelers, fewer in number, are received cautiously, but with careful attention to both opportunity and safety. Goods that were once abundant are now valuable, and households learn to prioritize storage, preservation, and efficient use. Children observe these exchanges, internalizing lessons about resource management, negotiation, and communal interdependence. Historians note that these economic adaptations fostered resilience, enabling communities to sustain themselves despite the profound disruption caused by the plague. As evening approaches, the village settles into a quiet rhythm of labor, care, and reflection. Smoke rises gently from chimneys, shadows stretch across rooftops, and animals follow predictable routines shaped by the habits of their human companions. Families gather to share meals prepared from carefully rationed ingredients, and children recount observations of daily work and trade. Even small rituals, offering thanks, performing simple acts of care, or tending communal spaces, reinforce social cohesion. Historians later point out that the integration of labor, trade, and ritual played a critical role in stabilizing communities during the long recovery. By nightfall, the village is enveloped in a reflective calm. Streets are nearly empty, save for those completing essential tasks or attending to late chores inside homes. Families perform quiet routines that balance work, care, and the preservation of social bonds. Children observe, mimic, and learn, absorbing lessons in efficiency, negotiation, and cooperation. Historians emphasize that these long-term adaptations, born of necessity and reinforced through observation and repetition, were foundational to the transformation of rural economies and social hierarchies in the aftermath of the Black Death. In the deep hours of night, reflection dominates thought. You notice how households have integrated the lessons of scarcity, risk, and survival into daily routines. Labor is coordinated with care, resources managed meticulously, and social networks leveraged for both practical and emotional support. Even small tasks, tending animals, preparing food, repairing homes, now carry significance, representing both continuity and adaptation. Historians highlight that these patterns illustrate the human capacity to incorporate knowledge from crisis into sustainable economic and social practices. By the early morning of the next day, the village resumes activity with quiet diligence. Fields are worked with measured effort, livestock cared for systematically, and households manage tasks efficiently. Children assist in chores, learning the value of labor, cooperation, and observation. Adults negotiate work and trade, balancing scarcity with opportunity. Historians later note that the post-plague economy, shaped by labor shortages and adaptive strategies, fostered both resilience and social mobility, altering the relationships between workers, households, and community structures. By late morning, the village demonstrates the integration of long-term adaptation and economic strategy. Labor is distributed efficiently, essential resources are managed meticulously, and informal networks support collective work. Craftsmen and artisans, fewer in number, provide essential goods, and households diversify tasks to ensure sustainability. Even minor exchanges, sharing firewood, trading surplus produce, or assisting with repairs, reflect lessons learned during prolonged crisis. Historians emphasize that these adaptive behaviors contributed to lasting changes in European rural economies, demonstrating the intersection of necessity, ingenuity, and social cohesion. By afternoon, the village shows subtle but meaningful changes. Fields are maintained systematically, livestock guided with care, and households operate with efficiency born of months of experience. Social interaction, trade, and collaboration follow patterns informed by caution, observation, and prior experience. Children internalize these behaviors, learning both practical skills and social norms shaped by crisis. Historians note that these long-term adaptations, forged under pressure, contributed to the evolution of labor practices, economic opportunity, and social organization in post-plague communities. As evening falls, the village assumes a rhythm shaped by experience, adaptation, and reflection. Smoke rises from chimneys, shadows stretch across streets, and families gather to coordinate tasks, share meals, and preserve both physical and emotional stability. Children observe, participate, and internalize lessons about labor, trade, and communal responsibility. Even small gestures, offering assistance, conserving resources, or performing quiet rituals, reinforce social cohesion and long-term survival strategies. Historians highlight that this stage of adaptation demonstrates the remarkable ability of human communities to integrate economic, social, and psychological lessons into daily life. By nightfall, the village rests under a sky heavy with clouds, stars faintly visible, and the moon casting silver light over rooftops and fields. Labor, trade, and resource management have become internalized, forming predictable routines that balance opportunity, risk, and necessity. Families sleep with awareness of past hardships and confidence in their continued ability to adapt. Historians emphasize that these patterns illustrate the resilience and ingenuity of human communities, reflecting lessons learned from both scarcity and survival, and shaping economic and social structures for generations to come. Morning arrives over the village with a quiet, reflective light. Clouds hang low, soft and heavy, casting a muted glow across rooftops and fields. You rise to a world still marked by absence and adaptation, yet infused with resilience. The streets are calm, animals move predictably, and households begin their routines with careful attention. Smoke curls gently from chimneys, hearth fires warm homes, and the subtle hum of daily tasks carries an underlying rhythm shaped by months of endurance. By mid-morning, storytelling emerges as a subtle yet essential practice. Families gather in quiet spaces, recounting experiences, recounting losses, and preserving the knowledge that has become vital to survival. Children listen intently, absorbing lessons in observation, caution, and care. These stories are not grand tales of heroism, but careful reflections on the rhythms of daily life, the nuances of human behavior, and the lessons learned in observing both death and resilience. Historians later note that such oral traditions played a crucial role in embedding survival strategies into the social consciousness of future generations. By noon, the village rhythm is punctuated by quiet reflection and narrative exchange. Elderly villagers share accounts of illness, grief, and adaptation, describing the sequence of events, the measures taken to survive, and the subtle ways communities adjusted. Children and younger adults listen, internalizing behaviors and forming mental frameworks for response in times of crisis. Even small gestures, a nod, careful demonstration of a task, or the passing of an herb become embedded in storytelling, teaching lessons through example and practice. Historians highlight that these practices contributed to the persistence of communal memory, guiding behavior long after the immediate crisis had passed. By mid-afternoon, storytelling takes on ritualized forms. Families gather around fires, recounting experiences of daily adaptation, the rhythms of labor, and the careful management of risk. These narratives blend fact with interpretation, shaping both emotional understanding and practical knowledge. Children participate, observing both verbal and nonverbal cues, while adults reinforce lessons through demonstration. Historians note that this interplay of story and action forms the foundation of cultural memory, ensuring that knowledge of survival, adaptation, and caution persists across generations. By late afternoon, stories evolve to include broader reflection. Families recount not only immediate survival strategies, but the ways in which society, labor, and community structures shifted under the pressures of mortality. Discussions arise about the changing economy, new rituals, and the subtle adaptations that defined life post-crisis. Children learn to recognize patterns, anticipate risk, and navigate social networks effectively. Historians later observe that these narrative traditions were essential in preserving collective wisdom, embedding the lessons of the Black Death into cultural memory and social practice. As evening approaches, storytelling merges with ritual and observation. Smoke rises from chimneys, casting a soft glow, while families gather indoors. Elders recount the passing of friends, neighbors, and relatives, weaving memories into lessons for those listening. Children ask questions, offering opportunities for reflection and deeper understanding. Even the act of listening becomes educational, as subtle nuances, tone, gesture, and emphasis reinforce the behavior and decisions that ensured survival. Historians highlight that these quiet, reflective practices of storytelling were fundamental in transmitting knowledge, social norms, and cultural values. By nightfall, the village rests under a sky heavy with clouds, stars faintly visible, and the moon casting pale light over rooftops and streets. Families perform quiet rituals, repeating stories, recounting observations, and reflecting on the cumulative experience of months of plague. Children internalize both caution and empathy, recognizing patterns of behavior that ensure safety and stability. Historians emphasize that the integration of storytelling into daily life helped communities preserve collective memory, shaping social norms and guiding future generations in the continued practice of adaptation. In the deep hours of night, the village settles into contemplative stillness. You notice how oral traditions have evolved to reflect both emotional and practical knowledge. Tales of survival, subtle instruction, and careful observation circulate quietly, reinforcing patterns of behavior and social cohesion. Even minor acts, placing herbs, attending to the sick, or performing quiet tasks, are contextualized through stories that link action to meaning. Historians later highlight that this interweaving of narrative, practice, and reflection allowed communities to retain lessons of mortality and resilience in a coherent cultural framework. By the early morning of the next day, villagers rise to continue routines, now informed as much by lived experience as by stories passed through families. Children assist with chores, performing tasks with guidance from narrative memory. Adults coordinate labor, maintain households, and reinforce social networks with a sense of continuity and purpose. Historians note that the persistence of storytelling ensured that knowledge of adaptation, precaution, and communal responsibility was both remembered and actively applied, embedding survival strategies into cultural consciousness. By late morning, the influence of stories on practical life is evident. Labor is coordinated efficiently, resources managed meticulously, and households navigate risk with awareness shaped by both personal experience and communal memory. Children imitate behaviors described in tales, practicing caution, observation, and empathy. Even informal social interactions, greetings, exchange of goods, and shared care reflect the guidance embedded in narrative traditions. Historians emphasize that these patterns demonstrate how cultural memory operates as a living, applied framework for survival and social cohesion. By afternoon, storytelling encompasses reflection on broader societal shifts. Families discuss the redistribution of labor, the emergence of new economic opportunities, and the subtle ways communities reorganize themselves to maintain resilience. Observing these narratives, children learn to navigate social, economic, and environmental challenges with insight and awareness. Historians later note that such integrated storytelling, combining practical knowledge, social norms, and emotional understanding, became a cornerstone of post-plague cultural continuity. As evening falls, storytelling merges once again with ritual. Families gather by hearths, recounting both individual and communal experiences, emphasizing the lessons learned from hardship, adaptation, and mortality. Children participate actively, asking questions and observing demonstrations. Even small gestures, arranging herbs, preparing meals, or performing quiet acts of care, are reinforced by stories that link action to reflection. Historians highlight that these practices helped maintain social cohesion, transmitting knowledge and shaping behavioral norms for generations. By nightfall, the village rests in reflective calm, the soft glow of fires, shadows stretching across interiors, and the quiet movements of animals outside provide a backdrop for contemplation. Oral traditions, storytelling, and ritualized observation interweave with practical daily routines, reinforcing behaviors that promote survival and stability. Historians later emphasize that these cultural practices, the careful recording of experience, the transmission of lessons, and the embedding of knowledge into narrative, were essential in preserving the memory of the Black Death and ensuring the continued resilience of communities. Morning arrives over the village with a muted, soft light, the sky a blend of pale grays and gentle blues. You rise to a world that feels familiar yet subtly transformed. Streets are quiet, animals move predictably, and households begin routines with careful diligence. Smoke curls from chimneys, hearth fires warm homes, and the air carries the faint scent of herbs and earth. There is a sense of continuity, yet beneath it lies the quiet weight of the past months, the memory of loss and adaptation woven into every step. By mid-morning, reflection becomes part of daily life. Families engage in their routines with awareness of both past hardship and present stability. Children observe adults moving with quiet purpose, learning the rhythms of labor, care, and observation that have become essential. Even simple tasks, drawing water, tending animals, preparing food, carry meaning, a connection between survival and the continuity of daily life. Historians later emphasize that these patterns demonstrate how human communities integrate memory, experience, and behavior into sustainable practices. By noon, the village demonstrates the persistence of resilience. Households coordinate work efficiently, care for livestock, and manage resources thoughtfully. Children participate actively, absorbing both practical skills and subtle lessons in caution and observation. Conversations revolve not only around immediate tasks, but also around reflection, sharing experiences, recounting lessons, and contemplating the delicate balance of risk and continuity. Historians note that this integration of reflection and action illustrates the deep human capacity to adapt, endure, and maintain social cohesion under prolonged stress. By mid-afternoon, resilience is evident in both social and practical behavior. Families assist one another with tasks, coordinating labor across households, while maintaining the caution and hygiene practices learned during the plague. Children watch carefully, internalizing the rhythm of cooperative work and the importance of observation. Even minor tasks, exchanging goods, repairing homes, or tending fields, are performed with mindful attention, reflecting lessons embedded over months of survival. Historians highlight that this period represents the consolidation of adaptive knowledge into daily routines, ensuring both safety and continuity. By late afternoon, the village reflects on collective experience. Families gather for quiet conversation, recounting the events of the past months, noting how routines, rituals, and observation contributed to survival. Children participate in these discussions, learning to appreciate both the fragility of life and the strength of communal effort. Even small gestures, placing herbs, offering water, or maintaining communal spaces, are imbued with meaning. Historians emphasize that this process of reflection reinforced social cohesion and transmitted resilience as a living practice, embedded in both memory and behavior. As evening approaches, the village assumes a calm, measured rhythm. Smoke rises from chimneys, shadows stretch across rooftops and streets, and animals move predictably, responding to the routines of their human companions. Families gather to perform essential tasks and quiet rituals, while children observe and participate in ways that consolidate their understanding of both practical survival and social responsibility. Historians later observe that these reflective practices, repeated daily, helped communities maintain stability and adapt successfully to future challenges. By nightfall, the village rests under a sky heavy with clouds, stars faintly visible, and the pale glow of the moon illuminating rooftops and fields. Families perform final tasks, secure their homes, and reflect quietly on both losses and lessons learned. Children internalize behaviors, rituals, and routines that will guide them in the months and years to come. Historians emphasize that the preservation of adaptive knowledge through both observation and practice represents a profound expression of human resilience and ingenuity. In the deep hours of night, reflection deepens. The quiet rhythm of the village, the murmur of the river, the occasional footsteps on cobblestones, the soft glow of fires, allows space for contemplation. Families consider the fragility of life, the necessity of vigilance, and the strength found in community. Even small gestures, arranging herbs, tending the sick, performing quiet acts of care, are layered with meaning, connecting memory, ritual, and survival. Historians highlight that these patterns illustrate the remarkable capacity of humans to endure and adapt, even under prolonged and repeated crises. By the early morning of the next day, life resumes its quiet rhythm. Households coordinate tasks, care for animals, and maintain routines with precision. Children assist, observe, and internalize, while adults balance efficiency with caution. Even the landscape reflects human adaptation. Fields well tended, paths cleared, and homes maintained. Historians note that these long-term behaviors, forged in the crucible of repeated mortality, exemplify resilience, foresight, and the capacity to preserve social cohesion. By late morning, the village embodies lessons learned through experience. Tasks are completed efficiently, social networks reinforced, and both rituals and routines integrated seamlessly into daily life. Children practice observation, empathy, and practical skills, guided by both narrative and demonstration. Adults navigate labor, trade, and household management, with awareness shaped by collective memory and past hardship. Historians emphasize that this consolidation of experience into adaptive behavior represents one of the most enduring human responses to crisis. By afternoon, the village exhibits subtle signs of optimism intertwined with cautious awareness. Labor proceeds efficiently, rituals continue quietly, and community interactions reinforce social cohesion. Families coordinate resources thoughtfully, children learn by observing and participating, and adults reflect on both survival and continuity. Historians highlight that the resilience observed in these patterns is both practical and emotional, a testament to human ingenuity and the capacity to adapt collectively to repeated challenges. As evening falls, reflection merges with quiet ritual. Smoke curls gently from chimneys, shadows stretch across streets, and the village settles into a rhythm that balances vigilance, care, and stability. Families gather to perform tasks, share observations, and remember those lost. Children internalize these lessons, observing both caution and cooperation. Even minor gestures, arranging herbs, tending communal spaces, assisting neighbors, reinforce knowledge, social cohesion, and continuity. Historians emphasize that these practices illustrate the integration of memory, reflection, and behavior into sustainable communal life. By nightfall, the village rests under a sky partially illuminated by stars, moonlight tracing rooftops and fields. Patterns of survival, adaptation, and reflection have become internalized, forming predictable routines that balance caution, care, and opportunity. Families sleep with awareness of past hardships and confidence in their continued resilience. Historians note that these enduring practices exemplify the extraordinary capacity of human communities to learn from crisis, adapt behaviors, and preserve both life and social cohesion over time.